Okay, this is chapter 4 of Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. Have you chosen the site? Asked Father. You see, even Father is joining in, said Belinda. What is a site? The plot or place where you build. I'll build it on my work table, said Tom. But it can't stay there, said Nona. No jolly fear, said Tom. Besides, it has to have a garden. If it has a garden, it should be near a window. Plants need light and air, said Mother. Plants? Until that moment, Nona had not thought of a garden with real plants. Where should we find them? She asked. In the fields and woods. Could we take them? Of course, they're wild. In Coimbatore, flowers grew on trees or creepers or else in the gardens. You mean little flowers growing around loose? Said Nona, amazed. She seemed to see a doll's house-size garden full of flowers of doll's house size. Could we make it on my windowsill? She asked. Could that be the site? Well, I had thought of an old table, said Mother. Please? Oh, let her, Mother. Very well. It seemed to Belinda that everyone was spoiling Nona. Belinda kicked the doors as she went out. At the cabinet maker's, Tom found a piece of rosewood. It was dirty and chipped. But it's real rosewood, said Tom, and when he had sandpapered it smooth, it was a deep, soft, rose-brown color. It will do for the top of the plinth, said Tom. I shall make it a base. But what next? Asked Miss Flower. She still could not help feeling anxious. Next was a visit to the wood shop. A wood shop? Asked Nona. She had never heard of one. You can buy pieces of wood, all lengths and sizes, narrow bits and wide ones. I hope you have some money, said Tom. Nona had the 10-shilling note, the half-crowns, shillings, sixpences, and pennies she had shown to Mr. Twilfit. She had her 9 pence a week pocket money saved up as well. Will that be enough? She asked Tom. Come and see. Come? How? Tom was getting his bicycle out. You mean on the back, with my legs hanging down? Said Nona in horror. Of course not. That isn't allowed, said Tom. I'll ride very slowly, and you can run beside me. Run? In the street? I couldn't, said Nona. Okay, no wood, said Tom. I'll get on with my galleon. The rosewood floor stood on Nona's windowsill. Miss Happiness and Miss Flower stood near it. Bicycles go so fast, said Nona. Miss Happiness and Miss Flower appeared not to hear. Tom whizzes in and out between buses and cars. They still seemed not to hear. Japanese people are horribly brave, said Nona. They did not contradict her, and Nona came and stood by Tom's table. Okay, I'll come, she said. The wood shop was a most wonderful place. There were big blocks and planks of wood, tiny, delicate moldings, thin strips, narrow bits and wide ones. There were chair legs and stool tops, every kind of corner and grooving, and handles from great front door ones down to the smallest dollhouse size. There were sheets of wood of every kind, stains and paints, screws and hinges. What did Tom buy? A terrific great lot of wood, Nona told the others when she got home. She thought it was wonderful that Tom knew what to ask for and that the shopmen knew what he meant, because I didn't, said Nona. It was all packed up, and Tom tied the long bits of wood to the crossbars of his bicycle, the screws and nails and pots of stains and glue and paint he put in his pockets. But you'll have to carry the rest, he told Nona. And run? Asked Nona faintly. Tom looked at her. Belinda would, he said. Okay, said Nona, and picked up the parcel. When you build a real house, there's the sound of bricks being piled, of all the concrete mixers, of wood being sawn and hammered, of lorries and shouts. The sound of a doll house being made is different. There's a tap, tap, tap from a little hammer, the shirring of sandpaper, the whirring noise of the fine drill as Tom made his drill holes. But the building noises made by Tom meant as much to Miss Happiness and Miss Flower as the sound of your real house being built could mean to you. Nona had taken them and their cushions into the playroom so they could see. What is he doing now? Whispered Miss Flower. He's making the corners. And now he's making the hall. And now, asked Miss Flower, he's making the 2 side walls. And then one day Miss Happiness cried, Oh, Flower. Yes, he's making a niche. A niche for our scroll and flowers? Oh, Happiness. Tom and Nona had argued about that niche. But I told you, said Nona, it's a most important part of a Japanese room. Be darned if you did, said Tom. But I did, a niche like a little alcove, I did. It took Tom 4 days to think out how to make that niche, but at last he found a way. It was fitted into one of the side walls, making a small alcove in it. If you want to know how he did it, look at the notes at the end of the book. We'll make it a separate little roof, said Tom, and a low floor inside. Oh, Tom, you are clever, said Nona. Honorable, clever Tom, said Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. Tom planned to make an entrance hall. He divided the front of the house into one big window and a small hall. A shoes-off place, said Miss Happiness. It should have sliding screens inside and out, said Nona. Christopher Columbus, said Tom. He might well have said it, for they were small and finicking to make, but he made them. The windows were made of frames, latticed, like the sliding screens on hinges that Tom took off 2 old cigar boxes of Father's. They swung back so that Nona could open the front of the doll's house when she wanted to play. Now the front of the house was finished, and the side walls and the niche were painted and fixed against the end pillars. Soon, from pillar to pillar, Tom would fix the heavier beams that would hold the roof. But what about the screens? Asked Nona. The sliding screen doors in the back wall and for the hall. I'll make them, said Tom. He sounded tired. But when? Christopher Columbus, said Tom. Can't I ever have a day off? To make all the sliding screens was most difficult of all. I need 6 hands, he said. At last he had put in the 2 back screens with their paper lattice and the plain and lattice screens for the hall, and it was a wonderful moment when Tom and Nona could slide them all backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards. Let Mr. Twilfit see that, said Tom. Now the walls were up, and the house only needed the roof to have all its bones, said Nona, remembering what Mr. Twilfit had said. But before the roof could be made, something happened that Nona had forgotten about. The something was school. I can't go, said Nona. Anne goes, Tom goes, Belinda goes. Of course you must go. No, thank you, said Nona, but it was no use saying no, thank you, as this was one of the times children were not asked. And one morning, Nona had to take off her red velvet dress, her white socks and silver bangles, and dress herself in a tunic and blouse like Anne's and Belinda's, a dark blue coat, and a cap with a badge. Then, carrying a case that held a new pencil box, a ruler, and her money for lunch, she walked with Anne and Belinda to school. She came home in tears. I knew she would, said Belinda. She cried all day. You mustn't cry here, the teacher, Miss Lane, had told Nona. It's here I want to cry, said Nona, and she did. Belinda was ashamed, but Belinda did not know how terrifying the big, strange new building seemed to Nona. There seemed to be hundreds of girls, and so much noise and bustle that it made her head swim. They, too, laughed at the way she spoke, and the little girl she sat next to, a pretty little girl with long golden curls, would not speak to her. By the time they reached home, Nona was sick with crying, and Belinda was so angry her cheeks were bright red. Mother led Nona to the fire and took off her coat and cap and gloves. She gave her some hot tea and brown bread and butter. Belinda had some too, and by they both felt better. When they had finished, Mother took out her sewing. The fire was warm, the sound of the needle going in and out was quiet and calm. Nona felt tired, but she did not cry any more. She sat on the rug and leaned against Mother's knee. You'll have to go again tomorrow, said Belinda. Then Mother said, why not take Miss Happiness and Miss Flower to school? They wouldn't be allowed, said Belinda at once. How could I take them? Asked Nona. In my pocket? No, in your head, said Mother. And before they could argue, she said, if you took them in your pocket, that would be breaking the rules, and you mustn't do that. But you could take them in your head. How? But a watery smile came on Nona's face. You say Japanese pictures are scrolls with paintings and writing? Nona nodded. In school, you can learn how to write beautifully and to paint. Can I? You read to us in that Japanese houses have matting on the floors. You could learn to weave mats on a loom. Like Anne? Certainly. Anne learned to weave at school. Then you can learn to sew. There are all those quilts and cushions to make, and the dolls need new kimonos. Miss Lane teaches you to sew nicely. Even Belinda is learning to make tiny, careful stitches. I'm not, said Belinda. Do you hear the Honorable Lady? Whispered Miss Flower. Kimonos, quilts, cushions, said Miss Happiness, her eyes shining. Tiny, careful stitches, and together they both sent fresh wish to Nona. Oh, honorable little Miss Nona, please go to school. Oh, go to school. And Nona began to think that perhaps school might not be so very dreadful, particularly as Tom said, I'll work for you every Saturday until the house is finished. It took a long time. Saturday after Saturday, grumbled Tom. Half-term came and went, and still the house was not done. Children are so slow, groaned Miss Flower. That was the first and only time Miss Happiness got cross. "Slow? They are wonderfully quick," she cried. "Quick and kind and clever. Don't you ever let me hear you say things like that again," cried Miss Happiness, and her little glass eyes flashed. "We must do the roof," said Tom one Saturday, and he said, "In a real house, when that is done, a bough is put in the chimney and the builders are given beer." "Do you like beer?" asked Nona. "Ginger beer," said Tom. "When the roof is made," said Nona, "I'll buy you a bottle of ginger beer." "But how is the roof to be made?" "It should be tiles," said Tom. He had drawn tiles in the plan, tiles like little scallops in rows. Now he had to think how he could make them. There was an old tea chest in the garage. It was stamped in big black letters. Tom looked at it. "It's the right thickness," he said. He took it to pieces, and from two of the sides he cut panels and glued them into place against a ridge pole. Nona looked at the great black letters. "But," she began in dismay. "But what?" asked Tom, as if he could not see anything wrong. "It looks horrid," said Nona, "not a bit like tiles. And why have you put the lettering outside?" "Why not?" asked Tom. "It shows." "It won't show," said Tom. "But it does," said Nona, almost tearfully. "Wait and see," said Tom. He sounded as if he knew exactly what he was doing, but Miss Flower could not help being anxious too. "Will it be all right?" she whispered to Miss Happiness. "Will it?" "I think it will," said Miss Happiness. Miss Flower wanted to trust Tom, but she thought it was wise to do some wishing as well. "I wish the house could have a pretty roof. I don't see how it can, but I wish it could," she wished. "How much money have you got?" Tom asked Nona. She had 4 shillings, and Tom went with her to the bookshop, where they bought a large sheet of stiff drawing paper. Then they bought a pot of dark blue poster paint. Mr. Twilfit did up the paper in a roll. "It's for the doll's house," Nona told him. "It's getting on, hey?" asked Mr. Twilfit. "Very well, thank you," said Tom coldly, and Mr. Twilfit's eyebrows went up and down as he watched Tom walk away out of the shop. When they got home, Tom stretched the paper on his work table, and he and Nona painted it evenly, a deep blue. In the afternoon, when it was dry, he sat Nona down at the playroom table and told her to cut the paper into long strips 2 inches wide. "Measure carefully," and he said cheerfully, "You could manage it." Nona looked at the beautiful paper and was not at all sure she could manage it. "Well, won't you do it, Tom?" "You must do some of the work," said Tom severely. "I have to bike down to the wood shop. I need a piece of wood." He took some more money from Nona and went off. Nona sat and looked at the paper. She was very afraid that she would spoil it. Very carefully she measured off 2 inches at each side, making dots to mark the width. "But how can I keep the cutting straight?" thought Nona. Still, very carefully, with the big scissors, she started to cut across from dot to dot, and sure enough, the strip was uneven and wandered up and down. "Silly Billy, you'll never do it like that." Anne had come quietly into the playroom to practice. "Then how?" asked Nona desperately, looking at the dreadful jagged stripe she had made. "Oh, Tom will be so cross," and she looked as if she were going to cry. "Look, fold it," said Anne, putting down her music. "Oh, Anne, please help me." "You must measure," said Anne. "But I did, 2 inches." "Right," said Anne, "but you need a knife, not scissors." She took a knife from Tom's work table and cut off the uneven piece Nona had left, then measured 2 inches again, marking with dots as Nona had done, folded the paper, and then slit along the fold. A smooth 2-inch strip came off. "Now try," said Anne. "Oh, Anne, you do it." "I haven't time." "Please, Anne, I don't want to make Tom cross." "Well, I'll fold it, then you try," said Anne. "Come on, it's easy." "It was easy, when you know how," said Nona. With Anne folding the paper and holding it steady, Nona was able to cut off an even strip. "And strip after strip," said Miss Happiness in pride. "Anne, you have such very clever, neat hands," Nona was saying. "So have you, Miss Nona," said Miss Flower. When Tom came back, the strips were laid out on his table, even and smoothly cut, and he was pleased. "But now we have to scallop them," he said. "Anne, you're the neatest one. You do them." He did not beg Anne. He ordered her. "Wish I were a boy," thought Nona. "What about my piano practice?" Anne said it as if she would far rather make the scallops. "Practice afterwards," said Tom. "Get the scissors, Nona." "They're here," said Nona, hoping Tom would not look in the wastepaper basket and see the strip she had spoiled. Anne folded each strip 4 times, and with the scissors cut one edge into even scallops. As soon as they were cut, Nona unfolded the strips, and with a deeper blue pencil, Tom marked a line between each scallop after scallop, strip after strip. It took longer to mark the lines. then to cut the scallops, and when Anne went to the piano to practice, Tom, with Nona to wait on him, was still at work. After tea, Anne helped again. Nona brushed the back of the strips with glue, making them really sticky, and Anne and Tom stuck them one at a time on the roof panels. They began at the bottom and glued them each a little above the first so the scallops overlapped. As one row of scallops rose above the other, they began to look very like tiles, and when the roof was covered bottom to top, back and front, Nona and Anne clapped. "I told you we could trust Mr. Tom," said Miss Happiness. As Anne and Tom started to make tiny tiled roof with a niche, Nona slipped out, all by herself, went to the grocer. She had to cross the road, but holding her purse very tightly, she crossed it. She was not nearly as afraid now as she had been that first day when she set out for Mr. Twilfit's shop. At the grocer's, she spent 2 of her last 3 9-pences on 2 bottles of ginger beer. The grocer gave her colored straws for nothing. On her way home, as she was not sure Anne liked ginger beer, she stopped at a flower barrow and bought a spray of white blossom. She had no money to buy any more. Miss Happiness and Miss Flower were puzzled when they saw Nona arranging the ginger beer on a tray. "We should have served tea," said Miss Flower, and she said longingly, "in the tea ceremony." Ceremony is a word Japanese dolls use a lot. It means doing something in a very respectful and special way. "In England, it is the ginger beer ceremony," said Miss Happiness, and she comforted Miss Flower. "See, our Miss Nona knows how to arrange flowers almost as we do. She does not put too many in the vase." Miss Happiness did not know that there had been only 1 9-pence left. "And plum blossom means hope," said Miss Flower. "It is hope," said Miss Happiness. "Look, Flower, look." Nona had put the dolls on the pretty tray she was carrying to the playroom. She'd stopped just inside the door, looking. Now Miss Flower looked too, and "Ah," whispered Miss Flower. On Tom's workbench stood the little house, with its tiled roof, its tiny hall, and the screen walls that slid, its 2 side walls, and the niche. There was, of course, no chimney, but where the chimney might have been, Tom had put a twig of green leaves for a bough. "How happy and gay they all are," said Miss Happiness. "One person isn't happy," said Miss Flower, and suddenly she had a dull shiver. "Listen," said Miss Flower. "Belinda, have some ginger beer." "I'm busy." "Belinda, come and see the Japanese house with its new roof." "I'm very busy." Belinda was still feeling left out. The next time she went into the playroom, she gave Tom's work table a good shake, but Tom had made the house so well that nothing moved or broke. "I wish Japan were at the bottom of the sea," said Belinda. But it was not Japan that made her miserable, for as soon as she heard the story of Peach Boy again, or thought about little Peach, she felt warm and comfortable. It was when she thought about the Japanese doll's house. "And Nona," said Belinda, gritted her teeth. She felt so jealous and cold and hard that she might have been a small iron Belinda. End of chapter 4.